Well, basically, it's the agreement that has now been beginning to be implemented, which is the staff agreement. That is the agreement that sets the framework for the debt restructuring. So once we have got this agreement, we should get the first tranche of the 2.9 billion very soon in the next couple of days. And then we have to continue our negotiations with our creditors, both bilateral as well as our private creditors, to work on the actual deal with regard to the restructuring.
So, from what you understand, what has the government undertaken to do with this restructuring?
Okay, so there have been conditions that have been put out with regard to the broadening of the tax base, increasing taxes, with regard to getting rid of or entering into private-public partnerships with state-owned enterprises. So there are a number of conditionalities of that nature which the government has to start to implement. And after 6 months, there will be a review. The IMF has also given money, I think, and this is the first time it's done this, for budgetary support. And hopefully that budgetary support will be for the social welfare and security net, so that the least well-off are not going to disproportionately bear the burden of adjustment.
Yes. And as you point out, that is quite unusual for them to do that. What do you think convinced them that it was necessary in Sri Lanka's case?
Well, I mean, the thing is this, is that we have to reform on a number of fronts. And at the present moment, the tax base, for example, we've introduced taxes for everyone earning over 100,000 rupees. There are lots of demonstrations against this because it's all of a sudden, it's a kind of shock or tactic. In addition, we've also increased the prices of electricity. So I think, in order to maintain a degree of political stability, they want to make sure that those least well off are going to have some support, and that support is going to be properly targeted rather than politicized.
And that's such an important point. So often the money hasn't reached those in need the most. Absolutely. What is your sense of whether this government has got the capacity to do that properly?
Well, it certainly has the intention. As to whether it has the capacity is yet to be seen. Because the president is of one party and he doesn't have any support in parliament except for one member, and he is governing with the support of the opposition. So that remains to be seen, because in Sri Lanka, I think the problem has always been with regard to implementation.
Corruption is key as well. There's been so much corruption in recent years.
Absolutely.
What is in place with this deal to ensure that that is tackled as a priority as well?
So the corruption is, we're going to come up with new legislation with regard to corruption. We're also going to get involved in the World Bank, that START program to get back assets that have been sent out of the country. So that is going to take a bit of time. And I'm not quite sure as to how much of the money that has been sent out can be recovered, maybe at most 10%, and it may take 10 years. We don't know that for certain. But definitely there is a commitment on the part of the government to tackle corruption. As to how it is going to be implemented, we have to wait and see in the next 6 months.
This amount of money is not enough in itself. Do you think this does open the opportunity, though, to talk to other lenders?
Exactly. The importance of this IMF deal is 2.9 billion does not resolve our problems. But as a consequence of the IMF doing this, we are not a default country anymore. We can receive assistance and loans and all of that from other bilateral and multilateral creditors. So it opens the door to more finance.
This is the 17th bailout for Sri Lanka since 2009. At some point, it may be that the IMF turns its back on the country. How essential now is that they make this work?
Absolutely essential. I don't think we have any options but to make sure that we go along with the IMF and that we complete this program. We don't have any options.
I talked earlier about Ranil Wickremesinghe. He seems to have stabilised things a little. We're not seeing the queues for fuel. We're not seeing the anger on the streets. How long do you think he can maintain that support, given there are some unpleasant pieces of medicine coming with that, like the new tax rates, as you point out?
This is the big question, sort of political stability on which the sort of economic recovery is going to be founded. Now, if there are major challenges, and there are bound to be, and if people come out and demonstrate against them, and he puts out the army and the police and deals with them with water cannon and tear gas and all of that, or even worse, if they start to shoot, then it's going to be a big problem. We're going to be in a very different situation indeed. But hopefully, I think people recognize that we have to pay more taxes, that we've had a culture of entitlement and subsidies, and that all of that has to change. But it's the manner in which all of that is going to be implemented that's going to be key.
Yeah. Sri Lanka had become such a mecca for tourism. There had been so much hope for the nation. What do you think are the building blocks that need to be put in place?
Well, to begin with, as far as the sort of overall economic recovery is concerned, definitely the broad basing of the tax regime and making sure that the taxes are properly paid and that is properly implemented. In addition to that, we have state-owned enterprises that are making losses of millions of dollars by the day. So they either have to be sold off or you have to get a public-private partnership. Then we have 1.5 million people on the public payroll, and that has to be reduced drastically. We have, I think, one of the largest standing armies in the world, and this is 12 years or 13 years after the war ended, that we need to get into demobilization and all of that. So there are a number of fronts on which action has to be taken. And it's a question of the willingness of the government to do it and the people having trust in the government to do it. I think the problem at the present moment is that they feel that government is not making sacrifices. The sacrifices are being put on the shoulders of the public.